By April 1945, the European theater of the Second World War has reached its inevitable conclusion. On the banks of the Oder River, just 60 kilometers east of Berlin, 2.5 million Red Army soldiers mass along the muddy banks, waiting for the final push. Tactical logic favors a swift surrender, yet top-level political paranoia is now the primary engine of the Soviet advance. The decision-making process has moved from the battlefield to the Kremlin. In Moscow, Joseph Stalin is fixated on the rapidly advancing American and British forces in the West. He suspects his allies are preparing to break their agreements and capture the German capital before his own troops can secure it. Even though Allied Commander-in-Chief Dwight Eisenhower personally guarantees that his troops won't march on Berlin, Stalin refuses to trust the assurance. He orders the final attack to begin weeks ahead of the schedule originally proposed by his generals. This political pressure from above collides with a desperate reality inside the city. The defense of Berlin falls to ad hoc militias filled with the elderly and terrified children, while 2.7 million civilians remain trapped without an evacuation plan. The gap between Stalin's geopolitical map and the reality in the trenches turned the battle into a forced, catastrophic collision. This was a conflict accelerated by the anxieties of the high command. This animated map shows the sheer weight of the Soviet offensive. To crush the final remnants of the German army, Moscow divides its massive force into 3 distinct army groups, or fronts, stationed along the Oder and Neisse rivers. The operation is designed as a massive, synchronized envelopment. Marshal Georgy Zhukov's central forces are ordered to punch straight through the eastern defenses, while the southern forces wrap around the city, and the northern flank moves to block any outside interference. Driving this strategy is a staggering concentration of mechanical firepower. The Red Army brings 6,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, alongside 40,000 artillery pieces, grinding across the open terrain toward the capital. The assault kicks off on April 16th, with a thunderous artillery barrage against the German lines at Seelow Heights. But the German defenders anticipate the strike. They pull back just beyond the curtain of fire, wait for the barrage to stop, and then easily reoccupy their defensive trenches. This early delay sends a wave of panic up the Soviet chain of command. Terrified of failing Stalin's rush timeline, Marshal Zhukov orders his reserve tank armies to charge up the steep inclines right through his own pinned-down infantry. The result is absolute chaos. Massive traffic jams of armored vehicles clog the narrow roads. When the Soviets switch on anti-aircraft searchlights to blind the enemy, they end up silhouetted in the mud, turning a planned breakthrough into a 3-day slaughter. By forcing a hasty attack against prepared high ground positions, the political anxiety in Moscow directly triggered a major tactical blunder. Breaking through this initial line at Seelow Heights cost at least 33,000 Soviet lives. Once the Soviet fronts finally break through those outer defenses, the Red Army races west, quickly severing Berlin's communication lines. As the city is cut off, the entire German military command structure violently disintegrates. Deep underground in the Führer bunker, Adolf Hitler suffers a total psychological breakdown. He wildly oscillates between admitting the war is lost and screaming at his generals to launch counterattacks using armies that no longer exist. While Hitler loses his grip on reality, his top lieutenants take a much more cowardly approach. In an exodus mocked by the troops as the flight of the pheasants, senior Nazi officials quietly abandon the capital to save their own skins. With the high command AWOL, the troops in the field are left entirely isolated. East of the city, the German Ninth Army is swallowed up in the Halbe pocket. Starving and under constant air attack, these soldiers attempt to break out through dense forests, with their few remaining tanks driving directly over their own wounded men in the brutal crush to escape. The men who started the war have either descended into delusion or run away. For the soldiers and civilians left trapped in the tightening ring, survival is completely detached from military strategy and reduced to savage, terrifying chance. By late April, the fighting pushes into the central government district, the Z-Zone. Combat devolves into block-by-block fighting with flamethrowers and anti-tank weapons through ruined apartments, canals, and barricades. Inside the city and in the surrounding areas, the dying German regime lashes out at its own people. SS units summarily execute their own soldiers for alleged cowardice, while camp guards lead tens of thousands of prisoners on death marches toward the Baltic Sea, shooting anyone who cannot continue. The invading Soviet forces bring their own wave of terror, fueled by a desire for retribution after years of brutal German occupation. Red Army troops execute prisoners of war and loot homes, acts that are widely tolerated and sometimes explicitly encouraged by their officers. This unchecked desire for revenge sparks an epidemic of sexual violence. Historians estimate that Soviet soldiers raped between 100,000 and 130,000 women during the battle, driving roughly 10,000 victims to take their own lives. Caught in the crossfire of two collapsing armies, Berlin's civilians have almost nowhere to run. Hundreds of thousands flee underground into massive concrete flak towers or train station tunnels, huddled together in suffocating, disease-ridden darkness. Every remaining structure of human civilization, military discipline, basic sanitation, human empathy, completely evaporated. The final week of April was a vacuum of unmitigated terror. The killing continues purely for the sake of symbolism. Soviet commanders throw their men into a 3-day struggle to capture the ruins of the Reichstag building, all to ensure the Soviet flag is raised in time for the May 1st holiday. The Nazi regime finally dies in the dark. Hitler commits suicide in his bunker, and on May 2nd, 1945, the shattered remnants of the city's defense officially surrender to the Red Army. This chart shows the astonishing density of the carnage. Over just 16 days of fighting, the Battle of Berlin claims at least 80,000 Soviet military dead. German military deaths are estimated to reach up to 100,000, alongside up to 100,000 civilian casualties. The fall of the city marks the end of the Holocaust and a long nightmare for millions across Europe. But as American and Soviet troops share a brief toast to victory, the citizens of Germany are waking up to a divided military occupation that will last for 45 years. Millions of lives were sacrificed to satisfy the paranoia and fanaticism of distant leaders. The Battle of Berlin remains a record of the human cost when ideology and ego dictate the end of a war.